Okay, Mike.
Okay.
So we're gonna do a little bio about you,
Okay.
and just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you've done, especially with the martial arts point of view.
Okay. You want me to focus on the martial arts? Um, I'm Mike Lee. Michael. I prefer Mike. I got involved in the martial arts when I was a kid. Like a lot of people, I saw Bruce Lee in The Green Hornet as Kato. But also, I like any movie that had some martial arts in it, like the Devil's Brigade, Darby's Rangers, anything that showed or featured somebody doing hand-to-hand combat or commando-style techniques, unarmed fighting or knife fighting, that type of thing. Those things interested me as a kid. I grew up on the west side of Chicago, in a pretty tough neighborhood. I laugh because my kids grew up in the south suburbs here, and I took them to the neighborhood. I'm not bragging, I just thought it was funny. I took them to the neighborhood that I grew up in, right? As an aside, you'll find that's a typical Mike Lee thing. There are all these other stories that are on that branch, but we're going to go on a little smaller branch. I took them back to the neighborhood that I grew up in, and we got to the west side, and they were still in grammar school, my kids, when they saw us, but they said, we're driving down the street, they said, Dad, don't stop the car. Don't let the windows down. Just keep moving. And I laughed. I said, I used to walk these streets as a kid. I wasn't in a car.
Yeah.
And you guys think you're tough. And this is where I grew up, right? And I was cool with it. But anyway, that's there. So anything I could learn from anybody who was doing martial arts, I picked up. Really started practicing in 1969. I say 1969, I bought my first issue of Black Belt magazine. Had Jin Fu Mark on the cover. It was doing Mantis, Gung Fu, and that dated me too because it was only 50 cents an issue then. You'll never find a magazine for 50 cents anymore. That's just, really? Damn, was there horses driving it? Riding down the... No. But, so I got into martial arts. I started practicing with my first instructor on a regular basis. His name is Tom Ronquillo. I met Tom when I was in radiology program. I worked professionally as an x-ray tech. I do CT in a hospital. I've been a CT tech since 1980. I've been an x-ray tech since 1975. Yeah, that's a long time. I started right out of high school. I went to x-ray school.
Oh, wow.
And I was at the hospital where I trained in a hospital-based program for that. And a friend of mine, one of the techs, he came in. I was working in the evening. Just went over there to just get some extra time in, doing patients, that sort of thing. And one of the techs came in. He had a gi over his shoulder. And I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Oh, I came to practice karate." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." He says, "My instructor's coming." I said, "You think he'd mind if I watch?" And he said, "I don't know. We'll see." And I don't think so. So, long story short, Tom came down in the elevator then, and I asked him if he'd mind if I watched. I watched the class, and it worked out for 2 hours. No mats on the floor because we were in a hospital. Tile floor. We did break falls. We did everything. I didn't do anything that day. But I asked Tom at the end of the class, could I join the class? He said, yeah, he'll be back tomorrow. The next day, he came and he gave me my first gi.
Oh, wow.
He brought me my first gi here, and I still have that gi to this day. I don't fit it, but I still have it. Because I was a little guy like this then, right? I swallowed somebody since then, but so I did that. Tom taught Kyokushin Karate and Aikido. He has second degree black belt in both. He also trained us in Iaido, which is the quick draw sword. He brought live blades to class, and we practiced with that. We practiced Kobudo, which is weaponry with nunchaku and not chucks. The correct word is nunchaku. And he taught us the art of the jo and bo. We practiced sparring with that, and that's what I did from like 19 until I was 21.
Oh, wow.
Okay, that was a few years, but this was good practice. And I found out later on, a few years later, it was after Mike and I stopped training with Tom. When Mike had moved to, my friend Mike, that's the guy who introduced me to Tom, he called me up after he'd moved to Atlanta, and he said his son, Alex, was at the time going for a merit badge in scouting. And he said, so one of the things they could do was martial arts, so he took him to a karate dojo. He said, you remember the stuff that Tom was showing us? We thought it was just the basic stuff. He said, yeah. I told him, yeah, I remember. He says, I just found out all that stuff he showed us was black belt and brown belt stuff. We were training from the time we started, right? So, but we didn't know any different. He just, he showed us a few forms, and we went over those, and we did those. We did 1-point sparring, and 3-point sparring, ippon kumite and sanbon kumite. And then we did things like I said, Aikido. Some people say Aikido doesn't work. I've used Aikido on the street. I've used Kotegashi twice on the street, and it works just like it does the way they show you in the movie, but it depends on who's teaching you the Aikido. Yeah. I've used it, I know it works.
Okay.
All right? And I know other people who have used it, and it works too. But then I had an accident where I was off of work for 10 months. Long story short, in the accident, I broke both heels. I had a chip fracture of L3. Oh, that's another story. I won't go into that story too long. But I broke both heels, and I figured, well, I'm not going to be able to move the same way I did before. And I need to do something different. Well, before the accident, my friend Jim Lee, I'd gone to X-ray school with, introduced me. Well, he didn't introduce me. He took me to a demo that was being done in Oak Park at some community center. And the guy doing the demo, he said, it's going to be a JKD demonstration. And Bruce was recently deceased, and I wanted to see it. I didn't know anybody doing this stuff in this area, right? So I went to this demo, and the guy doing it, his name was Herb April. Herb's deceased now. But Herb showed what he knew of JKD, that he had just returned from California. He studied it with Inosanto and Richard Bustillo briefly, and he also had spent a lot of time studying Wing Chun Do, which is really what he was into. He said Wing Chun Do is Jim DeMile's interpretation of what he got from Bruce. Jim was one of the 10 original students Bruce had in Seattle when he came to the United States.
Oh, wow.
So he showed us some stuff from JKD that Richard Bustillo had shared with him. He showed us some stuff that he got from Wing Chun Do. But another thing he showed us was he demonstrated Eskrima. Nobody. Carter was in office. This is how long ago it was. Jimmy Carter was president then. Nobody was doing this stuff. Nobody was teaching this stuff in the Midwest. Nobody was openly teaching. Filipino arts were around, but nobody was teaching this stuff openly except Herb April.
Oh, wow.
I met Fred Degerberg through Herb April, but that wasn't even at Fred school. And at the time, Herb was the guy who brought Bruce Lee's stuff to the Midwest, and he brought the Filipino martial arts to the Midwest. His interpretation of what he was doing. So that's where that's what I did to get back into the martial arts, because I figured after my injury, I was relearning to walk. Because like I said, I was off of work for 10 months. I spent 6 months in a wheelchair and was on crutches for another 4 months.
Oh, wow.
Before I went back to work. And then when I went back to work for a brief period, I was with a cane. So I met Herb at the demo before the accident. I kept his number. And while I was recuperating, before that, I'm an avid reader and I love martial arts. It's like my first wife. I tell my wife, that's my first wife. It's the only wife, the only girl I've ever been with that doesn't argue with me, doesn't disagree with me. She just accepts me for who I am and we love each other. That's it. So I read a lot. I used to go to East-West Market Exchange. Mr. Shim was Tom Ronquillo's original instructor. And I go there. I got to be such a regular and